I'm just waiting for confirmation to appear on the screen. The meeting is now recording, so I will now take the sederant for the Financial Resources Scrutiny Forum on Thursday, the 10th of November 2022. We have apologies from Councillor Matthew Buchanan, and we have Councillor Susan Kerr substituting for him. We have Councillor Dewar present. We have Councillor Ferguson. Do we have Councillor Gowland? No Councillor Gowland. I can see that we have Councillor Keat. Do we have Councillor Lockhart? No Councillor Lockhart. We have Councillor Mars. We have apologies from Councillor McAdams. We have Councillor Nugent present, and there are also various officers present today. I'll hand back to yourself, Chair.
Thank you very much, Carol. Okay, if we go into item number 1, which is any declarations of interest. And do we have any declarations of interest? Nope, we don't have any. Perfect. Okay, if we now move on to item number 2, that's the minutes of the previous meeting, and they are pages 3 to 6. Do we agree the meetings of do we agree the previous minutes?
I agree them, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mars. And we move on to item number 3A, and that is Capital Budget Monitoring 2022 to 2023, the General Fund Capital Programme, and that's pages 7 to 24. And if we can now hand over to Jackie Taylor and Derek to take us, Derek Craig to take us through. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this first paper is our capital budget monitoring for our general fund capital programme. This report and the reports that I'll cover in a minute are taking us up to the 7th of October 2022. If I take you to section 4 of the report on page 7, we're reporting that our revised capital programme totals just under £95.9 million. That includes some adjustments that were approved at the Executive Committee last week, totalling £1.177 million. The details of those are included in the appendix, which I'll cover in a moment. But section 4.2 of the report highlights the main movements in the capital programme, including timing of spend at the Rural Business Centre, Lanark, and the vacant and derelict land funded allotment project at Cunningar Loop. At section 4.3, as we've previously reported, the programme currently includes allocations for 3 significant projects where the level of spend in year has still to be confirmed. They're detailed there at section 4.3 and include Clyde Bridge, Larkhall Leisure Centre and match funding for Levelling Up Fund. It's unlikely that these funds will spend this financial year, but we will be bringing an update back to the next Executive Committee at the end of November and then feedback to this forum afterwards. If I take you on to section 4.6, we're reporting the actual spend to the 7th of October is £24.9 million. That's slightly behind where we expect to be, but it mainly just reflects timing of spend within education resources. If I take you now to the appendices, Appendix A is on page 10, and this is where we provide more details on the adjustments to the capital programme that was approved at last week's Executive Committee. They're there for your information and includes additional funding that we've had for some projects that we've brought into the programme and some movements around timing of projects. Appendix B, which is on page 11, this summarises the overall capital programme over resources, and you can see that at the table in the middle of the page. It shows the budget at the start of the year for each resource and any adjustments that we've put through this cycle to get to the revised programme. Appendix C, which is on page 12, breaks the programme down even further. So under each resource, you can see the services and the amount of capital budget that we have for each of those. Actual spend against those services is detailed in the right-hand column of the table. And then Appendix D, which is on page 13, gives a bit more information on how the capital programme is funded. This will be familiar from reports from previous forums. You can see at the bottom part of the table all of the funding sources for this year's capital programme. And as I've reported before, the main source of funding for us is borrowing and also Scottish Government grant. On to Appendix E. This is the summary of physical spend, physical progress on build, and Derek will take us through the detail there.
So page 14, we have the build executive summary, and as at this period 7 that we're talking about here today, there's no projects behind programme. Moving on to the non-build executive summary on page 15, there are 2 projects identified in the middle of the page as behind programme, and on page 16 there's a full list. There's a full list of those projects, and on page 17 the 2 projects are then given a further explanation. So the first one is the vacant and derelict land at Cunningar Loop allotments. The timescale of commencing the project has been impacted by a number of issues, including site access as a result of the ongoing Clyde Gateway Urban Regeneration Company works that are taking priority in the same location. In addition, there's been the identification of badger sets adjacent to the site, and has meant further ecological surveys are now need to be undertaken. The second of the 2 delayed projects are the Rural Business Centre in Lanark. The Scottish Government has confirmed their agreement to the Council's request for an extension to deliver the Lanimer Shed and the Rural Business Centre after a detailed search of an area of land at Lanark Racecourse has now been identified. A design team is now in place, with the timescales for completion likely to fall into next financial year, hence the reason why that project is reporting a delay. Moving on to page 18, and there we look at the roads executive summary, and in the top half of the page it's projects behind programme for this period. There are none. And that's all the report for the General Fund, Chair.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? No questions? So do we agree that report? Could someone please propose that report to be put forward?
Chair, I second the report if you're proposing.
Thank you. Moving on to item 3B, and that's a capital budget monitoring 2022-2023 housing capital programme, and there are pages 25 to 30. And I'll hand back over to Jackie and Derek, please, to guide us through those pages.
Thank you, Chair. So same time period being covered by this report, so it's up to the 7th of October, but this time it's the housing capital programme that we're dealing with. So at section 4, we're reporting that the programme for this year is £66.4 million. And at section 4.3, we're reporting that spend to the 7th of October is just under £25.5 million. Again, very slightly behind where we expect to be at this point in time. If I take you to Appendix A, which is on page 27, again, there's a summary there similar to the General Fund programme page that shows how the capital programme for housing is funded this year. The main source of funding is the housing revenue account that contributes towards capital spend, as well as borrowing and Scottish Government grant as well. And Derek can take us through the physical progress on Appendix B. Thank you.
Yes, page 1028 then is the Housing Capital Programme Executive Summary for this period, period 7. And near the top of the page, you will see that projects behind programme are highlighting this time that there are none to report to the Scrutiny Forum at this time. That's all for this report, Chair.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions with regards to item 3B? No questions? Can we agree the report?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 4, and that's the Revenue Budget Monitoring 2022 to 2023, and that's pages 31 to 38. And if I can hand over to Jackie again, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is on our revenue budget this time. Again, the same time period covered up to the 7th of October. If I take you to section 4 of the report on page 31, we're reporting at section 4.1 that we have a budget position which is a net overspend of £27,000. This is made up of some variances across a couple of resources. Firstly, community and enterprise resources are reporting a relatively minor overspend position. But more significantly, social work resources, our children and family service, are reporting an overspend position of just over £1 million. But that's offset by underspends in social work, performance and support service, and also in adults and older people service as a result of vacancies across social workers, daycare and residential homes. Now, the adults and older people budget is delegated to the Health and Social Care Partnership. If we were to remove that element of the budget underspend, the council's position would be an overspend of £675,000. Section 4.3 on page 32 covers a couple of inflationary and budget pressures. At section 4.3.2, we touch on transport within education. Whilst the resource is currently showing a break-even position, we have been advised that due to contract renewals, the costs that we will be charged by Strathclyde Passenger Transport, SPT, will be significantly higher than we had anticipated. The impact of that on the education budget will be reported back to a future executive committee and then on to this forum. At section 4.3.3, we touch more on the children and families pressures. This is a pressure that we've reported before and we continue to see around external placements in particular being the main reason for the continued increase in spend. Placements can be very expensive for one placement, so it doesn't take much for this level of spend to creep up. As detailed earlier in the report, the overspend is being offset at the moment by underspends within the adults and older people services, which is devolved to the Health and Social Care Partnership. We are looking at establishing funding solutions for the residual overspend. In 2021-22 last financial year, some of the adult and older people's underspend was retained by the council to help cover the children and families pressure, and the same approach has been proposed to the Health and Social Care Partnership for 2022-23. Section 4.4 of the report touches on some areas of underspend, in particular employee costs. Again, this reflects information that we've brought to forum before. We are reporting a high level of underspend on employee costs, and this reflects primarily the impact of difficulties in recruiting and retaining staff across a number of areas. Significant efforts are continued to be made to recruit, but it's unlikely that the level of underspend we're seeing at the moment will be reversed this year. We do have to take into account when we're looking at the bottom line position, as well as the underspends and employee costs, there will be other pressures elsewhere within resources, and you'll have seen that when we've looked at the detailed trend statements in the past. There are other pressures that resources are managing, but we do expect by the end of the year that the net underspend from employee costs is expected to be around £500,000 to £600,000. You will recall as well, we've mentioned before that there was a potential additional cost of the Wellbeing Day that was covered in a paper that was taken to Executive Committee in September, and that we could be using the underspends and employee costs to meet those costs. Section 4.4.5 covers adults and older people. Again, as we've reported before, we do expect there likely will be further underspends in relation to some specific funding streams that service has received, simply again related to recruitment challenges and getting these projects up and running. We'll continue to report that position back to Forum. And then at section 5 of the report, we're covering our housing revenue account and we're reporting a break-even position against that at the moment. There are some appendices to this report. So Appendix 1A on page 35 gives a detailed breakdown of spend and budget against our resources and services. And you can see on the right-hand column any variances within those services. And then on the next page, Appendix 1B, you can see very similar information, but broken down over types of spend, such as employee costs and property costs. Again, variances are detailed on the right-hand side of that table. And then on Appendix 2, on page 37, we have our housing revenue account statement, which, as I reported earlier, is reporting a break-even position at the moment. So that's the report in summary, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? No questions? Okay, can we agree that report?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you very much. So if we go into item number 5, and that's the revenue budget monitoring 2022-2023, the detailed resource analysis on pages 39 to 92. And if I can ask Lorraine to take us through that report, please.
Thank you, Chair. So agenda item 5 starts on page 39, and the first part of the paper is the summary report explaining what the detailed papers behind it actually entails. So we have a top level summary for each of the resources. We have the narrative explanation of the most significant variances within the resources, and then we have a line-by-line trend analysis in terms of each of the individual resources and the housing revenue account. So the first resource then is on page 41, that's Community and Enterprise Resources, and the bottom right-hand corner of the page shows an overspend position of 39,000 for the period to the 7th of October, which is accounting period number 7. The next pages then show the narrative explanations, and as usual I would highlight the variances that are new to members. So those are underlined and start on page 42. There are 6 new variances for Community and Enterprise Resources running through to page 45, and I'm happy to take any questions on any of those, Chair.
Okay, do we have any questions for those? Nope, no questions. We can just carry on. Thank you.
Okay. The next resource is Education Resources, and that starts on page 51. As at the 7th of October, we have a break-even position for Education Resources, and there are actually no new variances to highlight for the resource this period, but the narrative explanations for your information are on pages 52 and 53. And again, I'm happy to take any questions.
So do we have any questions? Nope, no questions. Thank you very much. We can move on.
Finance and Corporate Resources then is the next resource. The summary for the resource is on page 59. Again, bottom right-hand corner, you can see that at the end of period 7, we have a break-even position for the resource, and there are some variances then to note across the individual service areas that are compensating to that break-even position. The narrative explanations are starting on page 60, and on page 61, there are 3 new variances to note, all relatively minor, and again, I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Do we have any questions? No questions? Happy to move on, thank you.
Housing and Technical Resources then is on page 67. Again, for the accounting period 7, you can see at the bottom right-hand corner, we have a break-even position, an overspend in property services, but that's offset by a corresponding underspend in housing services.
In terms of the variance explanations, they start on page 68, and there's only one new explanation, which is in the middle of page 68, and that's in terms of repairs and maintenance. And again, happy to take any questions on that or any of the other variances that are noted there.
Do we have any questions? No questions? Okay, thank you very much. If you can carry on.
The housing revenue account is the next set of variances. They are on page 77. There are only two, which is an underspend in employee costs and an under recovery in income, which offsets that. And there's nothing new to highlight in this period, Chair. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Is there any questions? No? No questions? If you move on to the next part.
The final resource then is social work resources, and that's on page 83. That's showing an underspend of £12,000 as at the end of period 7. But you can see that that includes the underspend, as Jackie explained earlier, within adults and older people, which is allowing us to arrive at that relatively minor underspend. The variance explanations for social work start on page 84. There are about half a dozen new variances across the resource for period 7. And again, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to pick them up. Thank you.
And do you have any questions? No questions? Okay, do we agree that report?
Agreed, Chair.
We get nodding heads, thank you. So item number 6, there's no urgent business. So I'd like to thank and conclude the meeting. Thank you for your attendance today. And I'd like to say that, announce that the meeting is now closed. So thank you very much.